From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Today, agricultural law professor at Washburn University Roger McEowen discusses two recent court cases regarding beneficiaries named in wills. The first case originated in Iowa with implications for Kansas. The second originated in Kansas, and they both demonstrate the importance of language when making a will. Also, K-State Environmental Quality Specialist Peter Tomlinson previews the 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Conference taking place February 11th and 12th just outside Kansas City. In agricultural news, we have information on two upcoming conferences sponsored by K-State Research and Extension. And Gus Vanderhoeven has this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Agriculture Today. Across the way once again is a regular guest on the broadcast. As you know, he is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, welcoming back in Roger McEowen. And Roger, you outlined for us today two legal squabbles, one in the state of Iowa, the other here in Kansas, over wills and trusts. And the first one has to do with whether an adopted child within the family lineage would qualify as an heir to an estate. And as we'll find out, you take issue with the outcome here.
Well, it is an unusual circumstance, and it points out that words mean things in wills and trusts, and it's also very difficult as a drafter of language that's going to be included in a will or trust to rub our crystal ball that sits on the table and be able to see what's going to happen 75 years down the road. So we have to be very careful with language that's used, try to think it through to the greatest extent possible as to what this could mean generations down the road if this event would arise. What happened in this case, and this is an Iowa case, but I would just point out as I go through this that the result would be actually the same in Kansas because we have the same language and the same presumption that is created under Kansas law when you have this situation. Well, what happened here was that you had an individual that created a will in 1942. It has a trust in the will, which is a very common provision in which you're going to want. If I have a will and I've got minor children or I want to benefit grandchildren and they're minors, we don't want them to get the property outright. We want to leave it in trust, have somebody manage that as trustee of that trust for those minor individuals. And then we'll put language in there that says when they can get distributions of that property. So he creates this trust under the terms of the will. There were 9 beneficiaries. The provision also said that in the event of a named beneficiary's death, the beneficiary's interest would pass to their, and this is the key now, lawful bodily issue. That was the language, and I can guarantee you that was the language that was used, and I can guarantee you that was a pulled off the shelf. What I mean by that is we all have our drafting forms, and if we're going to leave it in line, down somebody's line, we're going to use language such as lawful bodily issue, so forth and so on. In other words, the heirs of that individual. Well, the decedent died that created the will and the trust in 1948. And in 1956, one of the named beneficiaries, who was a grandson of the decedent, adopted a child. Now, the grandson died in 2016, and so the adopted child sought court confirmation that he and his descendants were lawful bodily issue. And of course, when you legally adopt a child, that child is treated by law as your blood relation for most purposes.
It's a biological offspring.
Right. So that would seem to fit within that language of lawful bodily issue. Well, the trial court disagreed, grants summary judgment for the trustee in this instance. No, the great-grandson is out. And it goes on appeal, and the appellate court affirmed. Now, the appellate court looked at Iowa law And again, I would reiterate, Kansas law is the same on this point. And they said Iowa law presumes that a decedent or a testator, a person that makes a will, intends to treat adopted children in the same manner as natural-born children. That's why you adopt them. That's why you go through the process and pay that money and go through formally cutting off a natural parent's rights. That's what the adoption process does. So that is the presumption, and that is correct. But the court said that presumption does not apply when there is an intent to exclude the adopted children, and that is shown in the will. So they looked at this language in the 1942 will, and they said, well, in every instance where he had these 9 beneficiaries, he included the language, lawful bodily issue if any one of them would predecease him. So he is very intent in saying lawful bodily issue over and over again. And the court looked at that, and they also cited a case from about 35 years ago where the Iowa Supreme Court said that a similar phrase, heirs of the body, did not include adopted children. And so the appellate court in this instance, the Iowa Court of Appeals, said there was no reasonable interpretation of the decedent's will and trust that allowed for an adopted child who is not the beneficiary's lawful bodily issue to receive a share of the trust. I have problems with that.
Right.
You know, you think of the basic principle of will interpretation, and that is that the decedent's intent is what we focus on. That has to be what carries the weight of the day. We have to do everything we possibly can to reasonably ascertain what the decedent's intent was at the time they executed the will. Well, of course, the decedent is the decedent. The decedent is no longer around, and we have to find other people that can testify as to what the decedent's mindset was. Maybe there were other provisions in the will that we can discern that intent from. And by the court cutting this off and saying, no, I'm going to grant summary judgment for the trustee, there's no trial. We're not going to try to make any discernment of that intent. The other problem I have with this is that the appellate court made no mention of the fact that under Iowa law, as I said earlier, a legally adopted child is treated as blood relation, or other words, lawful bodily issue of the adoptive parents for purposes of intestacy. In other words, if the grandson in this instance, now the great-grandson was the one that was saying, I am lawful bodily issue, it was the grandson that had died, he was a named beneficiary. Had he died without a will, meaning died intestate, then under Iowa law, his child, the adopted child, is treated as blood relation just like natural-born siblings.
That's the stark irony of this, isn't it?
Yeah.
He would have been eligible to inherit.
So if we're the appellate court here and we're turning our decision on the basis of whether an adopted child is lawful bodily issue, then in essence we're determining the outcome of great-grandfather's case in this instance on how the grandson died. Did the grandson die with a will or without a will? If he dies without a will, the adopted child is lawful bodily issue. He inherits from great-grandfather. If he dies with a will, we get a different result. That's crazy. That makes no sense to me, but there's no analysis of that in the court's opinion. So I back up to my initial statement, and that is we have to be very, very careful of the language that's used in wills and trusts and understand the potential implications of that language.
Now, that is a very recent ruling out of the Iowa Court of Appeals. The other item here, this is the case of the missing will. It's a Kansas originating case. Tell us about it, Roger.
Kansas used to have a statutory provision, it's since been changed, that says that you could deposit your will with the court for safekeeping. We don't do that anymore in Kansas. That has changed. And in fact, I'm not sure how many people actually did that when that provision was in place, but we had an instance where that just came up recently. This was a will that was filed with the local district court in 1954. There was a codicil that was placed with it in 1988. And it wasn't until later, after those dates, that the state law changed. So what happened was the individual dies. The daughter and the stepdaughter were named co-executors in the codicil. They can't find the will anyplace, so the decedent, before he died, had told a grandson that the documents were in his safety deposit box, and it was also mentioned to the stepdaughter by the decedent and his attorney that the documents were filed with the court. Well, he died on October 15 of 2014, and about 3 weeks later, the daughter, the stepdaughter, and the grandchildren find an unsigned codicil in the safety deposit box. No good. Has to be signed. So they've got a document here that's not going to be helpful. They have to find the original will, and they have to find the codicil that is signed and properly executed. So they go to the courthouse, and a courthouse employee said, we don't have anything on file for the decedent, and said, we used to do that, but we don't do it anymore. Go to the Register of Deeds office. And Register of Deeds said, no, we don't have anything. Go home and search the home. So they did. They went home and searched the home. There's no will there. So then they asked the attorney that bought out the decedent's attorney's practice to look for it, but he couldn't locate the will either. And so we're into the spring of 2015. Daughter files an intestate probate with the court and is appointed executor of the estate, because you have to file the will after death with the court within 6 months for it to be valid. So now they're saying, well, we can't find it. We're just going to handle the estate as if he died without a will. So it's going to be intestate. And now we're going to use the state of Kansas's will that's provided by statute, the intestacy statute. The stepdaughter files an opposition to the probate that the daughter had started, asked the court to terminate the executor and freeze the estate, because the attorney that had bought out the drafting attorney's practice actually found the will on September 15. And guess where he found it at? He found it at the county probate court, exactly where it had been deposited back in 1954. So now they've blown past the 6 months time frame. Is this a valid will? Well, it gets into the court system, and the district magistrate judge entered the will into probate, daughter appeals, and in July of 16 now, that was November of, I believe it was 15, now we're into July of 16, district court entered an order admitting the will to probate, and they held that the mistake by the court did not toll the statute of limitations of admitting a document to probate. They just kind of said, no, equity, there's a whole bunch of weird stuff going on here in equity. If we want to be fair, we need to kind of waive that, and we'll allow this will to come in. And that's what happened. And it went on to the state Supreme Court. Based on equitable concerns and the circumstances involved, the Supreme Court said the statute of limitations had not run, and the will would be recognized as the decedent's final will. There were attorney's fees involved, too, and the court also approved those.
It sounds like fairness prevailed here, though.
That's what it was. It was fairness. It's a weird set of facts, but the court did say, based on the circumstances, we're going to allow this one in. We're going to waive that 6-month statute.
As always, Roger, it's interesting to hear about these court developments, and of course, he captures all of this in detail on his regularly updated blog at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Roger, as always, many thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
A professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. That's Roger McEowen, and we'll be back on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Well, we've invited back in Environmental Quality Specialist, K-State's Department of Agronomy, Peter Tomlinson, for a glimpse to the fast-approaching 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Council Annual Conference. This year it is co-sponsored by K-State, and it's set for Tuesday and Wednesday, February 11th and the 12th at the KCI Expo Center just north of Kansas City along I-29. And this is a premier event for any of you producers or others with more than just a passing interest in cover crop production. And one of the reasons you're really pumping this conference this year, Peter, is, of course, its proximity. This would be the first time it's been held in these parts.
It is. It's a real opportunity. For our producers, we would certainly welcome them to attend both days of the program. The first day, February 11th, is the business meeting of the Midwest Cover Crops Council. And then February 12th is the conference portion of the program, and the day that I would encourage producers to look at attending. And we've got a great set of breakout sessions. These will repeat twice, and the three focus areas are crop production, livestock and grazing, and environmental and economic aspects. In the crop production, we'll look at research coming out of the University of Missouri, Kansas State University, and the University of Nebraska. In the grazing section, we've got a Kansas native speaking on, the integration of cover crops into his operation, Sean Tiffany with the Tiffany Cattle Company, as well as speakers from the University of Missouri on harvesting and feeding cover crops, and the University of Nebraska on cow-calf grazing of cover crops. And then in the environmental and economics section, we'll be addressing leasing arrangements, talking about cover crops and water quality and other considerations of the economics of cover crops.
There'll be something for anybody that has any level of interest in cover crop production for whatever purpose on their land. So, Peter, once again, you mentioned that there will be this cover crop water quality benefits section as part of the conference program, and you'll be presenting that. So you'll be drawing from research in this area that you've been involved with at K-State lately?
Yes. So at the conference, I will be presenting work from the Kansas Agricultural Watershed Field Laboratory Project. This effort has been led by Dr. Nathan Nelson in the agronomy department, along with a team of other faculty members, including myself. The results that I will be focusing on is our work around cover crops and water quality, and particularly phosphorus. We've gained some significant insight over the past 5 years that project has been running. This will be an opportunity to share a summary of that data and some things that we need to think about, and where we've recognized some advantages of adding cover crops into our cropping systems, and some areas that we need to focus on additional research. What we've learned from the Kansas Agricultural Watershed is that cover crops in this no-till system, it's a corn-soybean rotation that we have out there, have continually, so when this project started in 2014, we transitioned the location to no-till so that we could look at how the system adapted over time and how our nutrient losses, our nutrient behaviors changed. And so we've consistently seen a decrease in the annual sediment loss with the addition of cover crops. So worked out each year to about a 65% decrease in the amount of sediment. And as that system has matured, our annual loads have gone down in terms of the sediment loss. The other really interesting piece that we've learned out of this is, interestingly enough, over the first 5 years, we've not seen a significant difference in the total amount of runoff leaving the small approximately little over 1 acre watersheds with or without the addition of cover crops, but cover crops do change the water dynamics. And so we've been able to document reduced peak flow of our runoff events, so that water where we've added the cover crops comes off slower, and the duration of that runoff event lasts for a longer period of time. And there's some seasonality of this. We've noticed when we've got a series of multiple events stacked together, the cover crops, those watersheds tend to stay wetter, have a higher soil moisture content. Interestingly enough, that can actually lead to some larger runoff totals that time of the year, particularly if we don't have a growing cover crop. Now, if we have a growing cover crop, those watersheds can be drier at times. But the end result at the end of the growing season, or what we call our water year, which starts at the end of October, approximately at the end of harvest, and runs through the next October, is that the total amount of water leaving the watersheds has been similar. And so we'll see what happens in the next 5 years as this study matures. And so be talking about that, highlighting the soil conservation advantage, but we'll also be addressing phosphorus. And when we started this project, we were hoping that we would find that cover crops reduce our phosphorus loss. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we haven't found that. And I think it's important that we learn early that, we're not affecting the total phosphorus loss, and the runoff data actually highlights that the addition of cover crops has increased the amount of dissolved phosphorus leaving the fields where we've planted cover crops. And so from a management standpoint, this really highlights an opportunity as we think about our phosphorus management across the state, an area that we need to do more work. And so we've got funding for 5 more years of work out at the Kansas Agricultural Watershed that will really dive into some potential new strategies around phosphorus management for the future. In addition to the water quality work, as we hear about soil health, we've been doing work to try and understand how is our microbial community responding, and particularly some pieces of the biological component of soil health around phosphorus cycling. And so we found that where we've planted cover crops, we've increased microbial biomass phosphorus, so the amount of phosphorus that the microbes are incorporating into their structure. We've seen increases in enzyme activities. Enzymes are the catalyst of phosphorus cycling, and we've looked at a range of those enzymes. And, consistently they've increased where we've planted cover crops. That'll be highlighted in the talk. As well, we'll talk a bit about some of the information we've been able to gain around phosphorus stratification. We've all been a bit surprised how quickly in the transition to no-till we've developed phosphorus stratification. And so right now at the very near surface, and so we're talking the top 2 inches, we're over 80 parts per million Malic 3 phosphorus. And so, when we look at a 6-inch soil sample, we're still well within the range of our K-State fertility recommendations. And so, this is an area that we'll be focusing on in the next 5 years and looking for opportunities to adjust and adapt.
A full plate of findings, and it'll all be interesting to pass along to the audience at the conference. And there to close is a break on registration if one does so by the end of this month, you say, Peter?
That is correct. We're trying to get everybody registered as soon as possible. So if you register by January 31, at that point, the prices will go up by $25. The rate for an ag professional to attend, if they're interested in attending one of the 2 days, it's $140. And if they're interested in attending both days, it's $180. If farming is your primary occupation, the registration fee is $80 for 1 day and $100 for 2 days. Or if you are a certified crop advisor, as we feel there's a lot of valuable information for that audience as well, we have a grant that is supplementing certified crop advisor registration. And so that is $80 for 1 day and $100 for 2 days. You are welcome to register online, or there is a link to print a registration form.
Very well. mccc.msu.edu is that website. Don't let the chance to take this program in pass you by, for it's not in our neighborhood all that often. The 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Council Annual Conference, again, the dates February the 11th and the 12th. The location is the KCI Expo Center near the airport, of course, outside of Kansas City. So good luck with that program, Peter, and appreciate your time on all of this.
Thank you very much. Glad to have the opportunity to visit with you today.
Peter Tomlinson from K-State's Department of Agronomy, where he's a Research and Extension Environmental Quality Specialist. And we'll be back here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, our nation's ag and food producers are awaiting implementation of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, and in turn, the benefits to their industry once it takes effect. Rod Bain has more.
The U.S. ag sector's long wait is almost over. From December 2018,
the USMCA is the largest, most significant modern and balanced trade agreement in history.
When President Donald Trump and his Mexican and Canadian counterparts signed the new trade agreement between the three nations, to Mexico's legislative body ratifying USMCA late last year. Then,
the yeas are 89, the nays are 10, the bill is passed.
The U.S. Senate approving the deal last week. Once Canada's parliament ratifies the USMCA trade deal later this winter, the new agreement between the three North American neighbors will take effect. The one thing most in our nation's food and farm industries agree is the primary benefit of USMCA is certainty in market access.
The Canadian and Mexican markets are huge for us, and we need to make this happen and get some certainty back into the marketplace.
USMCA, while important, is not going to be a panacea for agriculture. It's more about adding certainty to the marketplace.
John Doggett of the National Corn Growers Association and Rob LaRue of the National Farmers Union, respectively. And while the emphasis by ag stakeholders in general that USMCA do no harm to farm trade appears to be in place, there are several examples how this new trade agreement will represent improvement. For instance, the dairy industry. Former Agriculture Secretary and now CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council, Tom Vilsack, explains.
That, of course, will open up opportunities in Canada. It will also result in elimination of Class 7, which, of course, will assist us as well in maintaining a decent price for powder.
And Tim Trotter of Edge Dairy Cooperative adds when figuring U.S. dairy's two largest export markets.
40% of our exports go to Canada and Mexico, so that's vital to us.
Other gains made to U.S. agriculture are noted by U.S. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon in a recent committee deliberation of USMCA.
More of our wine is going to make it to shelves and stores abroad. It ends harmful discrimination against wheat grown here.
And the U.S. Trade Representative's Office Chief Ag Negotiator Greg Dowd says significant advances were made in UMCA on issues regarding sanitary and phytosanitary trade barriers.
The discussion about standards for biotechnology and consultations about new types of biotechnology like gene editing.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Kansas State University officials will present the most current information on how to grow hemp in Kansas based on the first year of research trials at university test plots across the state. The Industrial Hemp Conference is scheduled for February 4th at the Sedgwick County Extension Education Center in Wichita. The conference begins at 8:30 and ends at 4. Registration is $50 per person if received by January 28th or $75 after that date. Because the seating is limited, early registration is encouraged. The conference is open to all, from beginning growers to those considering growing industrial hemp on a larger scale. Topics include disease and insect protection, regulations, lab testing opportunities, and growing hemp in high tunnels. Officials from the John C. Pear Horticultural Research Center and the Olathe Horticulture Research and Extension Center, where hemp is also being grown and tested, are part of the conference agenda. For more information, visit the K-State Industrial Hemp Facebook page at K-State Industrial Hemp. Kansas State University has also opened early registration for 2 Junior Producer Days that will be held in late February and mid-March. The Junior Beef Producer Day will be Saturday, February 29th, and the Junior Sheep Producer Day will be Saturday, March 14th. The events are hosted by the K-State Youth Livestock Program, K-State Research and Extension, and the K-State Department of Animal Sciences and Industry. Registration costs $15 for each event or $20 after the early deadline. That early deadline is February 7th for Junior Beef Producer Day and February 21st for Junior Sheep Producer Day. Both events will be hosted in Weber Arena on the K-State Manhattan campus. The Junior Day programs are a one-day educational opportunity for youth, parents, project leaders, agents, and others to increase their knowledge of youth livestock production and management. Topics planned include project selection, nutrition and feeding, meat science, health, reproduction, grooming, showmanship, and the state livestock nomination process. K-State faculty members, staff, students, extension agents, and guest speakers will lead the sessions. These are biennial events with sheep and beef days hosted in even years and swine and meat goat in odd years. Both Junior Beef and Junior Sheep Days will offer an instructor-led training for youth attendees to earn their YQCA certification, which is provided as an optional session after each Junior Day program concludes. Normally takes about 90 minutes. YQCA is a National Youth Livestock Quality Assurance Program in its second year. For more information, visit www.youthlivestock.ksu.edu. And finally, in this week's Tree Tales, K-State forester Ryan Armbruster discusses pine wilt disease and which pines are more susceptible to the disease.
Kansas has the unique distinction of being the only state in the lower 48 where no pines grow natively within its borders. But that hasn't stopped generations of Kansans from planting pines by the millions in our parks, backyards, and most frequently in our windbreaks. Austrian and Scotch pines were, for many years, the preferred species planted across Kansas and much of the Great Plains. However, these European natives are highly susceptible to pine wilt and have been nearly wiped off the map in much of the region. Pine wilt is a fatal condition caused when native pine sawyer beetles feed on a susceptible pine species and spread pine wilt nematodes, which clog the tree's vascular system. Pines native to North America, such as eastern white pine, ponderosa pine, and southwestern white pine, are largely tolerant of these beetles and nematodes, and do not suffer the same rapid decline and death as exotic pines such as Austrian, Scotch, and Mugo pines. If you suspect that your pine has succumbed to pine wilt due to large limbs or sections of the tree quickly showing yellow needles, followed by the entire tree turning yellowish-brown, you can send a sample to the K-State Plant Diagnostic Lab through your local extension agent to confirm the diagnosis. There is no treatment once pine wilt is present in the tree, and the best management tactic is to remove the dead tree and burn the wood before the adult beetles emerge to infest another nearby susceptible tree. In most years, this should be done by the end of March. Remember, the last step of any tree removal is to replant, so consider planting native conifers or hardwoods to replace pine wilt-killed trees. I'm Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health Specialist with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Agriculture Today continues in a moment. This is the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all socioeconomic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
My red oak, it will sprout again.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I've not yet gone to every dam and waterhole on the farm, so it's possible there will be more surprises. But I've seen enough. Mr. Beaver is active and well. I've no clue where he has been this past summer, but wherever he went, he is back. It may be she is back, and for all I know, it may be they are back. I have to walk the farm to see where else there is activity, but where I've seen it, I don't like it. The farm has known beaver activity for a long time, long before I owned it. All along the creek there are old beaver dens. Driving close to the creek bank is dangerous with sudden caving. Over time, several old dens have eroded and caused more erosion. I've done bales of old hay in the large cavities developing spontaneously along the creek bank. In some places, the beaver will try to dam the creek and raise the water level. When the beaver settles in the farm ponds, I'm afraid for the dam in which the beastie dug a den. The trouble, of course, is that I have too many trees growing close to the farm ponds and dams. Without trees, I expect less beaver pressure. It's also because of a gnawed-on tree that I noticed the beaver activity when Guido, my oldest son, and I walked the farm. Walking the trails and across the short hay meadow, we came to the well-hidden small pond. It's the pond I've seen deer drinking, wood ducks nesting, as well as other water birds. The birds taking off on my approach and climbing rapidly to get above the trees. Once up, they make a big circle and are gone. The deer looks and takes one leap and is back in the woods and bushes. This small pond is of no use to cattle. They are fenced out. It's there for wildlife, and as you see, there is plenty. What it also does is collects water during heavy rain, which otherwise would flood the hay meadow below. It has a job to do. As I like to walk by it, there are a few trees which are special to me. And there was one tree, a gorgeous red oak, I wanted to open up so it could spread its branches. It would drop its acorns for wildlife, all close to the water. Perfect habitat. I watched the red oak grow over the years, reminding myself to clear around it. Well, as Guido and I walked up to the small pond, I noticed it's all cleaned now, and my promising red oak will soon tip over. Mr. or Mrs. Beaver has done the job, and they are good at it. Little stumps are still standing up like white toothpicks. And the red oak has been chewed through by now and laying down, resting on its once promising branches. What I still see is the very pure white chewed-off bark and neat stumps. I would have loved it to sit there and watch the beaver busy on a bright, moonlit night, gnawing away. But I expect ever alert because Brother Coyote lives and prowls there also. There's plenty of proof of that as I see the scat. Every now and then he catches a rabbit. I've also noticed that deer hair in the scat. Good scat is like going to the library for information. Maybe if I tore the scat apart, I would see more. Maybe. I don't blame the beaver. I know I'm warned. When we bought the farm many years ago, I had a bulldozer, actually two, come and do dam repair work to several dams where beavers had played havoc with the structures. It was not a cheap repair, but was well done and well worth it. One pond, also partly hidden, became my swimming hole on hot summer days. There never was anyone with me with a cell phone camera, and that was good. But on that pond, a beaver has also been chewing on trees, but those were cottonwoods. Even tastier to the beaver, surely easier to chew. Gosh, I wonder how many beavers are on the farm right now. I discussed the question with a friend, wildlife biologist. He told me that he needed a few live beavers to stock another natural area. I told him to come and get them. I would help him. It's a fact that the beaver can do great creative work and pond up water, which may be beneficial. In other places he destroys. Of course, he destroys in my eyes. In the beaver's eyes, it may all be constructive work. After all, he is an engineer. Many years ago, I caught beavers in a live trap. I released them at another location. My brother-in-law, John, helped, and he was quite impressed. This was real stuff. It was no Bambi game. Studying that beaver in the live trap, I was impressed by its physical attributes. The teeth for gnawing. Must keep gnawing. What also intrigues me is how they travel up the creeks to reach a point of settlement, and how that can involve traveling a fair distance over land. At this time, there should be no litters yet, as the beaver's mating season is midwinter. The young are born 4 months later. Whoever we catch will be in time to raise a family. The place where it will be released will be a good habitat. As a matter of fact, as an engineer, he or she will be busy. There are plenty of cottonwoods which need to be cut down. And that is the purpose of catching and then releasing, stocking in an area where beavers are needed. Beaver has a job to do. My red oak, it will sprout again.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Thanks once again for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.